All right, thanks everybody. Again, my name is Brian Hiley, and I'm a solutions engineer focusing on our network security products here at VMware. And as Drew highlighted in the previous kind of kickoff session, east-west, that traffic is becoming the new battleground. When we're out talking with customers, we're seeing that well north of 80% of the traffic that they're running inside the data center is in fact going east-west. And as these applications start to modernize and get updated, that amount is only increasing. So everything that you saw in the previous session that Drew mentioned is VMware's approach to how we can protect that traffic and ultimately limit lateral movement and protect the assets that you hold dear inside the data center. And with just the sheer number of workloads that are running on vSphere today worldwide, it's critical that VMware provides a way to make it easy to begin to secure these modern threats. So I'm excited we're going to walk through this quick demo of how we can start to apply security controls to this traffic inside the data center with just a few simple steps. We're going to do it without changing any of the underlying physical networking, meaning you don't have to go in and completely change how you're operating your environment from a network perspective. We can layer on security right on top of it. I'm going to highlight some of the cool and interesting workflow enhancements we've made over the past couple of releases of NSX. And then along the way, we're going to look at how our policy configuration approach ultimately helps you simplify overall operations. So we're going to get the demo squirrels going, and we're going to start looking at our environment. What I have here as I kind of narrate through what we're going on here is a simple vSphere 7 environment, multiple hosts that are available, and we have two applications deployed, a couple 3-tier apps. One is production, one is development. And in fact, these applications, the VMs are all running on the exact same network. This is the same VLAN. We've exposed a port group on the VDS, the virtual distributed switch, and that's where we've deployed these applications. Our first step that we're going to do is we're going to deploy what we call the NSX Manager appliance. And if you've done anything with vCenter, any kind of virtualization operations, this is a simple OVF deployment. We're going to download from myvmware.com the unified appliance file, massive 8-9 gig file, and then we're going to go through the process of uploading it into the system in the vCenter, and then following that simple wizard of filling out the name, IP addresses, which host we want to store it on, that sort of thing. So it's almost kind of a next finish type of approach. And why I've recorded this is these take definitely a few minutes to deploy. So I've gone ahead and deployed the appliance into this demo environment. You can see that right now I have it powered on. So our next step after deploying the NSX management appliance is just simply to log into it to complete the next step. So we'll go up into the user interface, and we're just going to log in with the admin account in this case, and get us to the login screen, where we can take the vCenter and add it as what we call a compute manager into our configuration. And this is going to just allow us to take those vSphere hosts, the VMs, all of the contextual information that we get from vCenter, and allow us to use it to simplify the installation and also to do policy creation, which we'll get to on the latter half of the demo. So to create a compute manager, it's fairly straightforward and simple. We're just going to click on Add a Compute Manager, and then we're just going to fill out a form. You can see we're going to give it a name. This can be the same thing we have in vCenter. Then we have a choice. Do we want to use our IP address, or what we're going to do here is use the full FQDN. And then there's two other pieces of information that we need to provide: the vCenter user and the password. Now I'm going to use, in this case, the administrator password for the environment, but in our documentation, we call out all of the specific privileges that are required if you wanted to go ahead and create a custom user, which most of our customer deployments do. After we've done that, we're going to click Add. We'll be presented with a request to verify that the thumbprint is in fact what we want to add. And at that point, we'll see vCenter being registered as a compute manager within the deployment, and it's going to begin establishing a connection back And then that inventory that I was talking about of hosts and VMs are going to start being pulled into NSX. After we've done that, we're going to jump over to one of the more exciting things when it comes to the deployment piece called Quickstart. Within the NSX UI, we've added a couple of options here that we can pick from that we think just really simplifies the overall deployment. So we can either pick things like, I want to deploy just the security components on top of my existing networking. I don't want to change anything. I can go ahead and select the full traditional NSX deployment of overlay, edge nodes, and the like, or I can use it to simplify migration of different VDS types. In this case, we're trying to get a quick start on segmenting the traffic in our network. So we're going to go ahead and pick that first option, which is just going to put the security components themselves onto our hosts. What we're presented with is the result of that compute manager that we configured earlier. So we can see that it's given us an inventory of our clusters. And the process to actually deploy the security software onto the host is as simple as selecting the host and clicking Install NSX. We get presented after that just a verification and an awareness screen of here's what's going to happen. We can see that in the case of our virtual distributed switch, it's already configured. We're just going to leverage the existing VLANs. Drew said it. I mentioned it on my opening statements here. We're doing this without changing any of the underlying networking. So whatever you're running on, if it's passing packets into the vSphere environment, we can apply security right on top of it. So nothing we need to do here. It's all good as far as we're concerned. So we're going to go ahead and click Install. So while this is going, what's happening behind the scenes is NSX Manager that we're in right now is pushing those kernel modules into each of the hosts that we requested for our installation. This is going into the hypervisor itself so that every one of our VMs that are running, those 6 that we saw earlier, are now going to have a virtual firewall applied to each one of their virtual interfaces. And the nice thing in terms of the deployment is we don't have to reboot any of the hosts. And we're not installing any extra software on any of the VMs. We don't even have to touch them. They're just going to get the benefit of these additional security controls being able to be configured. The last thing I'll call out on this before we kind of shift over to some policy pieces is that each one of these VMs now has a firewall applied to each one of their interfaces, and it has a default policy applied. So not only do we not have to require reboot of the hosts, we don't install any other software on the VMs, we're also not blocking any traffic out of the gate. There's a default allow rule that is put on every single one of them. So from the process of deploying NSX Manager, adding the compute manager, and then now using the quick start, we can simply and quickly deploy NSX on our vSphere environment. And if you guys caught, I quickly clicked the warp space-time box earlier so we could speed this up. So that's an extra feature that we've included in here as well. So at this point, the installation's done and we're ready to do the segmentation policies. And the goal that we're going to be looking at as we move through here is segmenting those production and development applications. We want to be able to isolate them so one cannot talk to the other. Basically, we want to prevent that lateral movement in our environment. And to make things operationally and deployment-wise easier, we're going to leverage a tagging model for our applications so we can simplify our process of applying policies. Ultimately, this is going to allow us to tie into any number of automated app deployment solutions as well as pipelines. We're fully work with a number of them out in the industry today. So we have a shiny new NSX deployment. Everything has been installed. For the purposes of the recording of the demo, one thing that I did cut out is the copy paste of a license key in there. So you're going to see as we move forward, that little blue bar at the top is going to be disappeared. So full disclosure there. All right, let's jump into creating policy simply with NSX. So again, in our environment, we've got production and development. I'm going to start by creating tags to signify those different pieces of our environment. And it's a simple process of giving it a name. And then we're going to pick some of the initial VMs that we want to apply this tag to. We'll scroll down. This is the inventory we got from that compute manager, our vCenter earlier. And then we're going to select those three and we're going to apply. We're going to repeat this process with our development tag. Same steps, we're going to add it, give it a name, and then we're going to pick the development VMs this time. Everything I'm doing here is just with the pretty UI. It can also be done via API. In fact, there is a far greater number of deployments leveraging the use of APIs to do these actions than otherwise. And we can also tie this into any number of automation systems, as I said earlier. All right, we got our tags done. Now we're going to take those tags and we're going to create dynamic groups that we can leverage to then apply policy. So the goal here is we don't want to have to come in and every time an application is deployed, we have to go touch a firewall. We don't have to mess with IP addresses and changing those every time something comes and goes and moves in the environment. So we want to make it as dynamic as possible. So we're going to create two groups. Our first group, surprisingly, is going to be broad. And then we're going to pick the membership criteria. In our case, we can go up to 5 different criteria that we can match in order to put a VM into this particular group. I'm going to go ahead and say, pick all of the VMs that have the production tag applied. I could also pick all the VMs with a certain name or naming convention, regex expressions here. I could pick operating system name. Back to what Drew said earlier, we have the context about the workload because we're in the hypervisor. We can create policies based on specific versions of Windows. Maybe you still have some Windows 2003 laying out there. We can get very specific about policies applied this way. And of course, we could still do IP address if you want it. So I picked my production one, and then I'm going to do the same thing after I save this, and I'm going to go in and create my development. So we can set this up one time, and so now moving forward, we can leverage these groups over and over and over for our different policies. So I'm going to go ahead and pick the dev tag, and then we'll apply. Now, the nice thing we can also do, just if you're wondering, hey, is this actually working, is we can look at the membership by clicking on View Members. And this is going to show us, in the case of prod where I'm clicking on here, which VMs actually have that tag and were automatically assigned. Notice I didn't go in there and add those into the group. I said, use the tag. It was the VMs that I tagged earlier that are now in there. We got our tags done. Now we created our groups. The last step really is let's just go create our policy. And you'll see some similarities to what Drew was showing in his slides earlier on the policies that we're going to create. We want to, again, create core segmentation policies to prevent my production and development apps from communicating on the same network. I'm not going to dig into, full-blown micro-segmentation here. I just want to get some quick wins and start to limit the blast radius, prevent lateral movement inside the data center because the amount of traffic that I have continues to increase. So to do that in our policy engine, we'll go to our environments and we're going to add a policy. And within that policy, we'll have our rules configured. In this case, I'm going to give it a better name than new policy. It's something a little bit more descriptive, like production to development segmentation. And then I'm going to add my 2 rules. And just like that, I'm going to go in and I'm going to give new rule a better name. In this case, I want no production to development. And here's where the groups come in. We're going to go in, click on that pencil, and we're going to be presented with the list of groups that we just created. And from there, we pick the production group because our source in this particular rule is going to be the production. We're going to do the same thing on the destination, but we're going to pick development. And We can go up to layer 7 with our firewall rules. So I can pick any kind of port protocol. I can even do layer 7 context, but I want to go ahead and just keep the all traffic because I don't want to communicate at all. And I'm just saying drop all traffic. Like any other firewall, we can log and that sort externally as well. So we can see anytime specific rules are hit. The next thing I want to do, I'm going to do the opposite. What if we have the development ones that are trying to reach out to production? I can drag now and drop the groups that I already used into the UI, make it quicker for me to do that. And then I pick drop again. So effectively, once I click publish, I will have provided segmentation rules to isolate my 2 application groups on that same VLAN. So by clicking publish, NSX managers are going to push these policy constructs out to each one of those hosts. In our case, you saw earlier we had 2. So it's going to push those out to all the hosts. So then those policies get applied to each one of those VMs virtual interface. So again, that net effect is I have segmented those production and development applications, prevented them from communicating, limiting the lateral movement. And if I click on all rules, we can see them in the greater context of everything else that's configured here. We see our rules that we put up at the top. And then anybody that was curious earlier, hey, Brian, what kind of default rules? We see those down at the bottom here, the default any. So unless it's specifically allowed, after it passes those rules, it's going to get dropped by those 2 policies, production and development. Now, I could take these same steps and pick my next segmentation goal. Maybe I have something that has to do with compliance mandate. Maybe I've got PCI, non-PCI workloads. We can take and create the same type of policies, creating those two groups, tagging the workloads. Another common one we see is I just want to take every one of my VDI desktops and keep them from talking. We can do that with one rule saying VDI desktops that are all tagged cannot talk to any VDI desktops. The other thing that I can do that Drew mentioned was we can dig in with products like NSX Intelligence into a specific application like our production app and truly build out and create a zero trust approach policy to a specific application. But we don't have to start there. We can start and get those quick wins by creating these segmentation policies within our data center quickly and simply. Now, operationally, what this does also is, back to what I said earlier, I can tag a workload. My developers with their pipeline can say, this is production, this is PCI, this is not PCI. And then once those VMs are instantiated and brought up, then those firewall rules are all automatically applied. If they move around, the policies follow the workload. And then ultimately at the end, when those VMs are decommissioned, those rules are automatically removed. No humans had to go out into a user interface and create and change policy rules for any one of those things once the initial things are set up. So using the same concepts, same groups, I can go from coarse to granular in my approach.
Brian, I assume there's some level of auditing. So when the junior admin accidentally blocks 443 to all the web servers.
Absolutely, it's part of the more detailed deployment of NSX, where we determine the logging, audit levels, all of that can be sent externally. So when the junior Brian admin here does exactly what you say, there is a written record that I did exactly that.
And just curious too, what about, is there any sort of way to do a reporting on this so that way when management comes in and they want to get a readout of this is what's currently being blocked, so then we could show it to our customers? So
out of the box, what you see here is it's going to be the an approach via the GUI. So obviously you can export screenshots. What we're seeing customers do to solve that is they're leveraging the APIs to pull out those rules. And then we've got additional tools such as Network Insight that can actually do a full kind of audit compliance report based on traffic and rules, rule drift and deviation. So several options that we can leverage based on really a customer's operating model. I mean, we we like to say that we integrate with most customers and the tools that they're using today. We don't want to get in the way or add additional friction. Thanks for that question.
I have to ask because I see this in the middle of the screen, the IPv6. Can you just give us an overview about the IPv6 capabilities?
Yeah, so as far as the data plane concerns and the rules, yes, we can support IPv6 based rules, and then actually the deployment of the NSX components has varying degrees of IPv6 support for that based on products like vSphere. Hopefully that answered your question.
Sure. Can you also do app detection and IDS on IPv6 as well?
App detection on IP or app with IPv6 and IDS for some of the app IDs, I believe we can. Stein, kind of keep me honest here on that, particularly on the IDS side.
You can, Brian. In fact, the app IDs as well as IDPs are independent from IPv4 or IPv6. So all of our app IDs and the IDPs is completely applicable to IPv6 and v4 traffic.
Yeah, that was what I'm assuming, but sometimes the devil is in the integration detail. Yeah,
definitely.
Right.
Thanks for checking and getting clarification there.
Yeah, Brian, I'm kind of struggling to identify the specific changes that have happened over the past few releases. Could you just give us a quick bullet point list of what's been updated?
Yeah, so a couple of things come to mind that to me or have been really big game changers. And 5 years of selling NSX to customers, going back to 2016 and NSX for vSphere, is we've simplified the deployment, as you saw with the Quickstart. Traditionally, it started off being fairly manual process of adding hosts and dealing with those kind of individually. We added the compute manager so we can get that inventory and further automate. And then these Quickstart workflows have just been a tremendous simplifier of the full deployment process. And then the other thing that comes to mind is when you look at what NSXT has done, being able to decouple a lot of this from the integration that we did with vCenter and NSX for vSphere allows customers to more quickly adopt these because it aligns better to their organizational models. So, I specifically use the use case here of things like our security on top of existing VLANs. I can hand this over to just a network security team, and they can own the overall management of this once the deployment's done. And then, frankly, the fact that you don't have to reboot anything on the host is fantastic.